So first, we will discuss what this research found in relation to attitudes towards people with minoritized gender and sexual identities. Joining us for this discussion are Professor Kath Brown and Dr. Chris Noon from the National LGBT Federation Research Subcommittee. And also we have Noah Halpin from TENI and Wyatt Walsh from Bi+ Ireland. They're going to join us now. They'll pop up onto the screen. You're all very welcome. Chris is a lecturer in the School of Psychology at NUI Galway and member of the National LGBT Federation Board. How are you doing, Chris?
Good, thanks, Anna.
Kath is a geography professor at University College Dublin. Her research interests lie in social and cultural geographies and in particular people's spatial experiences of sexualities and genders. Hello, Kath.
Hi, Anna.
Noah is TENI's healthcare officer. His work includes providing individual support and advice to the trans community going through the healthcare system, mainly in the areas of gender affirming healthcare, sexual health, and mental health supports. How are you, Noah?
Hi, Anna. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming along. And Wyatt is a volunteer with Bi+ Ireland. How are you doing, Wyatt?
Hi, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here.
Thanks for being here. Now, let's start with you, Chris. Can you tell us a bit more about what the survey examined? Chris.
Sure. So the survey was looking at attitudes towards different groups within the LGBT community. So the LGBT community is often thought of as a homogenous group by some people, and in fact we're many different communities, and often research that tries to address attitudes towards the LGBT community is really just concerned with attitudes towards gay men and lesbian women. So we wanted to look at attitudes towards, I suppose, other groups within the LGBT community as well, or other types of communities within our overall community. Mm-hmm. And we could have looked at this in many ways, but we decided to focus on how there can be gender differences and how different groups within the LGBT community are perceived. So it's important to look at differences between how gay men and gay women are perceived, how bi men and bi women are perceived, how trans women, trans men, and non-binary people are perceived. So. Okay. As well as that, we were looking at different beliefs around sexuality and gender, and we were looking at support for different policies that are relevant to the Irish context.
Okay.
The LGBT community here.
Okay. I believe there were clear differences in attitudes towards gay people, bi people, trans people, non-binary people, and intersex people. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, sure. So you can see the slide we have up here shows what we call feeling thermometers. So this is an approach that's used sometimes in social psychology and political science, and it's a way of trying to assess attitudes towards different groups in society, and it's useful because it gives a very broad picture of how people feel, but it also allows you to compare across different groups, and you can see that there's clearly more favorable reactions to lesbian women and gay men than there are for bi women and bi men, and then trans women and trans men, and then intersex people and non-binary people were rated the least favorably. Now, I think it's still important that all of these, the broad picture here is positive, but these differences are clear, and I think that the pattern that I see is that it's the groups that are kind of transgressing traditional gender norms in society that seem to be rated less favorably, and that seems to be the pattern here, but there could be other interpretations as well.
Okay. Kath, I'm going to come to you next because actually you worked on the project as well. Yes. 3/4 of the participants agreed that gender is a complicated issue and does not always match biological sex. What was your reaction when you saw this?
So I think we have to understand that the majority of people across this survey were really supportive of LGBT identities and LGBT plus identities, really. But there were some issues going on as well. So they saw gender as complicated, but people still reacted in ways that suggested we have more learning to do. And I think all of us have more learning to do. I'm a professor in geographies of sexualities and genders, and I still get confused with some of the terms. And I think admitting that and saying we all need to learn constantly is really important. And how we learn with people rather than kind of tell them what to do, I think is really key. So I was really happy with this result in lots of ways. It shows that people do have an understanding of the complexity of gender and the ways in which gender can operate beyond, there's just men and there's just women. And I think it shows that Ireland is in a very different place, really, in terms of these attitudes compared to places like the UK or, the US or Canada. And I'm a geographer, so I'm always going to say it matters where you are. And this survey really puts us apart from some of the other English-speaking worlds. So I think we should be really proud and excited of what New Ireland looks like and where we're going with New Ireland, but equally we need to be really careful about how we treat and deal with people who don't agree with us and are against us in all kinds of ways. So we need to be very aware of not acting in ways that are very off-putting, I think, or
in relation to that, Kath, your own work deals with the study of opposition to LGBT plus rights. And what do you think are effective ways of engaging with people who hold these beliefs?
Thanks for that question, Anna. No, I don't have one answer. What I think we need to do, so I work on a project called Beyond Opposition, and what it's looking to do is to explore what it's like for people who voted no in both the referendums. In part, and this is the way I often explain it to people, is, in 1983, when people voted no, how were we treated? And how might we want to create different worlds that treat people differently? And so I don't have an answer for how we might engage. And I think we still need to protest, we still need to educate, we still need to do all those things we've been doing for all these decades. But we also need to think about when we are in positions of power, when we are on YouTube with these viewers, what else might we do to encourage people in to the dialogue rather than creating, the social media polarization. You're wrong, you're evil, you're bad. I'm right, I'm good. So what are the ways that we might do it? And there's two things that drives this agenda. Firstly is that people aren't going away. So we see this in this survey, even though it was overwhelmingly positive, we still have a section of society, and across Europe, it shows that, and in Canada, it shows that. So even when you have same-sex marriage for decades, you are still going to have people who will not agree with it. What do we do? How do we treat them? And we haven't even had that discussion. And I think it's important to open up that discussion. Although some tell me we should throw them in the sea, I think mass genocide is probably not where we want to go. So, what are the ways that we might want to think about people who are not going to go away, they're not going to die out, how might we think beyond these kind of really easy solutions to think of something really more complex, but also that creates a world that if it changes again, and obviously we hope it won't, how are we going to be treated if we end up back on the wrong side? So I think we need to think through some of these questions. So I don't have an answer, but I have lots of questions, which is so academic.
That's fair enough. Fair enough. We have Wyatt Walsh from Bi Plus Ireland here. Wyatt, what do you make of the finding that Bi Plus people are rated less favorably than gay men and lesbian women by the survey participants?
So a lot of the results do line up with my own kind of understanding of experiences from other members within the Bi Plus community, and with my own experience as well. There's always been kind of an understanding within our community that the pecking order of sorts for acceptance within kind of the LGBT community would be that the monosexual identities, such as gay men and lesbian women, would be more commonly accepted, as there's a lot more kind of representation and education regarding those groups. And then you'd find kind of the Bi Plus community. It's also not surprising, unfortunately, that there's a noticeable difference in the acceptance between bi women and bi men. And I would imagine that there's a lot of different reasoning for that. But one thing that I guess I've noticed in attitudes from my own experience towards bi women compared to bi men is that there is a kind of a sexualization of bi women's identities, that while it's not a good representation of bi women, it does lend itself more to a normalization of the identity compared to bi men. There's also noticeably more representation, whether good or bad, of bi women than there is of bi men in media. Like I could probably name off the top of my head far more openly bisexual women in popular media than there is for bisexual men, which is disappointing.
Okay.
I also wonder if the view of bisexuality in women versus men is different, because there's kind of a prevailing idea experienced within the community that bi women are claiming bisexuality for the attention of men, and bi men are hiding behind bisexuality as a stepping stone towards being gay. So that would kind of lead, or it would lean bi women closer towards heterosexuality, and kind of closer towards a sense of being considered normal.
Okay.
I was also really surprised at the big gap in feelings towards bi plus women and bi plus men in that 18 to 35 age group. The only other age range that seems to have such a drop in points in, between bi women and bi men were the over 66 group, which really does kind of push back against that prevailing idea that younger people are more accepting.
Chris or Kat, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I have to say, as I used to be a volunteer in the committee of Bi Plus Ireland, and I can speak to that experience of bi men's identities often not being visible, and it's because we're often assumed to be gay, and so there are probably many more men out there who are in fact bi, but are read as gay because they're in a relationship with another man, or most of the time they're in hanging out in queer spaces.
Okay.
So like, from a personal point of view, I can speak to that.
Okay.
And yeah.
All right. Thanks for that, Chris. And Ward, I'll come back to you in a second with how the community could respond to these results. But Noah, I just want to come to you next. Only 9% of participants reported frequent interactions. Could you tell us about your reaction to this finding?
Yeah, I'm not surprised with that stat that's come in. And I think there are a number of factors to that. I think, it's very obvious that the trans community make up a very small population of Ireland. So it's thought, gender variance is thought to make up maybe 1 to 2% of the population in Ireland. So that would be about 46,000 people experience some form of gender variation throughout their lives. So considering we are such a small population, it would make sense that is quite a small stat. I guess the other thing would be that a lot of people will have met trans people and not known they are trans. So, they might have answered this question assuming that they have never met a trans person. But, like many of us here know, it's important to remember that there's no one way of looking trans. You cannot clock every trans person that you see. Most strangers would not know that I am trans by looking at me. Therefore, a few people who answered no to that question might have met me a number of times. And that might not have known it. And then I guess the other point is that not all trans people are out. Not all trans people are comfortable. They might not have begun a social transition, a legal transition, or a physical transition yet, or might never disclose their trans history. So they might be living with a trans person and not know this. So I'd say, with those kind of three factors, I'm not surprised by the percentage that's come back there with not having interacted with trans people.
Okay, I want to read this out, and it's for all of you, I suppose, but mainly Noah. There was less consensus on whether gender within this. In these results, there was less consensus on whether gender is determined biologically or something that we learn from society. Believing that gender is biologically determined has been linked to greater prejudice against trans and non-binary people. Therefore, the persistence of these beliefs may be a barrier to their inclusion in society. How can we challenge them?
With facts.
Yeah.
And that's how we challenge them, is we don't speak to people who aren't trans about trans identities. When we educate society about trans identities, about gender identities and gender expression, we talk to the people who are living those lives. We talk to the people who have that lived experience. And, what we've been seeing so often in the media as of late, the past kind of couple of years, is that we have bad faith actors speaking on behalf of trans people, that are spreading anti-trans narratives under the guise of a legitimate concern. And those concerns might be absolutely totally irrelevant to gender identity or gender expression or trans histories. So the way we combat that is we speak to trans people. If we want to know about trans identities, if we want to understand trans identities, trans histories, and trans people, there's no bigger experts to speak to than trans people.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely.
I totally agree with that, but I also think that there's, a broader issue here with how education in Ireland doesn't encourage young people to question dominant narratives about how society works. And I think if we had grown up in a society where we were taught about, where we had a subject on philosophy, where philosophy was taught in as a subject in schools, we were taught to question, what is the role of power, what is the role of gender in society, what different ways are there about thinking about gender, then people might actually, be more able to question gender norms and then actually, believe in a society where trans people are more included and work towards that society.
I think you're dead right, Chris. And I think from what you said there, not only for societal view or understanding of gender, had that been, or if that were the case in Ireland, where this, gender and constructs and philosophy were taught in schools, it's not only going to help the wider society, but actually younger trans people who might be experiencing some sort of thoughts of gender variance. I know if I heard the word trans or understood gender like I do now, when I was much younger, it would have saved a lot of hardships. It would have saved a surgery. It would have saved many things. So, I think you're absolutely dead right. And it applies to both wider society and people who might be experiencing or questioning their gender.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thought is that even though there are many positive results in this report, an important question is, what can we do to support bi, trans, non-binary and intersex people or gay and lesbian people who do not conform to gender norms? I don't know if anybody has anything to say on that. That's okay if you don't.
I think amplify the voices of those people. Just amplify those, these people are here. We're in this country. We want to be heard. We want to explain what our lives are like. We want people to understand that we're just like everybody else. We're just as boring as everybody else. We have the same bad habits and good habits as everybody else. And, it's all about speaking to those people, getting some lived experience and, letting society know that we are just the same as everybody else.
Sure.
Sorry, can I just add to that? And sometimes we're not, and that's okay too. And sometimes we're really different and we don't conform and we don't want to. And we should absolutely be celebrating how some of us are really, not me, I'm really boring, but other people are really flamboyant and fun and out there. And I think, not being gender normative and being, say, bi or intersex is really, really difficult in anywhere. I don't know that there's a place where it's okay, but particularly in Ireland, where communities are small and everybody knows each other, and recognizing that is really, really important, I think, too.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's recognizing that experience. I just wanted to add in the people that often get forgotten, which is women who are mistaken for men and their experiences of space and toilets and all kinds of things. And, you know, they may well be lesbian, bi, trans. It's not really about their sexual identity. It's about their gender identity. And that can be really complex and problematic. And I think as an LGBT community, we need to do more around intersex. And I know we have intersex organizations that are really key, but we're still not doing enough. And I think we should mention and amplify that a bit more as well.
Yeah, I think, Kat, that's a really good point in terms of intersex people, because, you know, a statistic that shocks a lot of people is that, you know, there's thought to be over 72,000 intersex people in Ireland, which statistically makes someone having an intersex condition just as common as someone with red hair. So, you know, the fact that if you've walked by two people with red hair today, you've probably walked by two intersex people today, and to not have those conversations when intersex people do make up such a large number of society and the population, you know, we need to be talking more, and we need to be educating more.
Okay, thanks for that, Noah. Finally, Wyatt, I said I'd come back to you in relation to how would you like to see the community respond to the results we were talking about earlier in relation to bi+ people?
Yeah, so I guess much like how Noah mentioned as well, having education would make such a huge difference, you know, having a better understanding of what being bi+ is, what orientations fall under the bi+ umbrella, and having this education early. Like it took me a while of examining my sexuality to see what term fit best for me, but I knew that I was somewhere under the umbrella as soon as I heard that bisexuality existed. And if I had known that earlier, I would have had more time to examine it, and I would have, you know, I would have come to terms with things a lot quicker. I'd also really love to see more supports aimed at specific sections of the community from within the community. Oftentimes when the LGBT+ community is highlighted, it can in reality just be the gay and lesbian community that's shown. Sometimes the trans community is highlighted as well, but it's often treated on its own. And sometimes the bi community is missed completely. Bi people make up such a large part of the LGBT+ community that it's always really strange to see our story and our voices take a backseat. You know, there's always obviously been a struggle for LGBT+ community voices to be heard, but even within the community, I can say from my own experiences that bi+ and non-binary voices are still having that struggle.
Okay.
I'd also really be interested to see how feelings towards the bi+ community differ from kind of the straight community and the lesbian and gay community, if at all. I think it would give really, really good insight to what work needs to be done specifically within our own community.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Wyatt. We have one question probably for Chris and Kath in relation to the study. Was the gender and sexuality of the survey participants gathered? And if so, was there a dominant demographic?
So yeah, we did collect that information. Well, in terms of sexual identity, the dominant sexual identity among the participants was heterosexuality, but there were people of other sexual identities. There were bi people, there were lesbians, there were gay people. The gender breakdown was slightly skewed towards women responding, and given the fact that when we broke down all of the questions by gender, women tended to give more positive responses. That suggests that the results in general, there may be a somewhat positive skew to the results in general. So yes, it is important to bear that in mind, that the gender breakdown is slightly more skewed towards women than the gender breakdown is in the overall population. Yeah.
Okay, and it's not a question, but it's hello from Rebecca in London, and Rebecca is listening in to us, so you can write a hello as well as a question into the comments section. Thank you to the four of you for joining us, to Chris, to Kath, to Wyatt, and to Noah. Really appreciate you joining us this evening. Thank you very much.